Ladies and gentlemen, boy, have you joined us for a great week, because this week we have my friend Jose Borquez, and that's pronounced Borkez. Don't be mistaken by the H or the U, as I've done in the past. It's a straight Borquez, which of course raises the question, why don't you just spell it Borquez?
You know, we inherit what we inherit.
I understand this gentleman is not a Native American, and yet he will not be deported because he moved here when he was 7 from Colombia.
That's right.
And we spoke briefly yesterday, and he does have some faint recollections of special rooms in the house and things like that, but I'll leave him to tell you about it. Jose, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. Well, and thanks for the invitation. Joe invited me to come and talk today about connecting medical devices to the cloud and the power of that. And so if you're ready for that, Joe, I'm happy to share my screen and we can get cracking.
Let's do that. Let's get cracking, as they say in Colombia.
Cracking. All righty. You guys see my screen there?
David Kemper wants to let me know that we can hear your conversation, right? That's the point.
Yeah, that's the point.
That's why we are actually broadcasting this.
All right, excellent. All right, so we'll be talking about, can you hear my conversation right now?
Yes, I'm going to mute myself. Go.
Sounds good. So we'll be talking about adding cloud connectivity to medical devices. And, we've got some slides, but obviously along the way, if people have questions, Joe, I know you moderate very thoughtfully. And if you want to bring people into the conversation, ask questions or make comments, please don't hesitate to interrupt. I thought I'd split it up into 4 sections. So the first one being, what does connected even mean? What does it mean to have connected medical devices? The second one being, why should I add cloud connectivity to my medical device? What are the benefits to the different stakeholders? The third one being how do I do it, right? So if you've sold me on the idea, I think it adds a lot of value, but how the heck do I now take my device that's not cloud connected and make it a cloud connected device? And then if time allows, I think we could talk about some things like usability, regulatory, cybersecurity. With medical devices, these are 3 areas that are always very important to think about beyond just the design of the product. And when you talk about cloud connected medical devices, it's all the more important. So to answer the question, what does it mean to have a cloud connected medical device? If we just think of classic medical devices that are not cloud connected. So, just kind of took some screenshots here of some devices, whether it be an ECG sensor or pulse oximetry or ultrasound. These are sensors. There's also therapeutic actuators. You typically have some sort of mechanical housing, so the thing that holds everything together. You've got some electronics inside. So here we're specifically focusing on electronic type of medical devices. And that's usually going to have some sort of microprocessor inside that'll either have the sensing technology or the actuating technology. And then you're going to have memory, and you're going to have, probably a battery if it's wireless. And when we talk about cloud connected, what we mean is that we then take that device and we send the data to the cloud. So the cloud being, a big computer or server that is accessible through the internet. That's the gist of what cloud connectivity means. And to get that data from the device to the cloud, you typically need some type of gateway. So as an example, most of us have some sort of device that connects to the cloud. It might be, an Apple Watch, or these days it could be your car. And there's some mechanisms. So the 3 most common mechanisms are using your phone to transfer the data to the cloud. And so then you need to get the data from your device to the phone. And the most common technologies to use to do that are Bluetooth and BLE. But it's not the only way. You might go directly through a router to the cloud. And then the most common means of doing that is Wi-Fi. And so, of course, we're all familiar with Wi-Fi, or all of our laptops connect to the cloud through Wi-Fi, or the majority do. And then the third, which is a bit more recent, has been the introduction of using cellular to connect to the cloud. So we'll talk about those modalities later, but just to kind of get us all on the same page on what we're talking about when we say cloud connected medical devices, this is the gist of it. The last portion of this on the right-hand side being the dashboard is just there to tell us that we're not only sending data from the device to the cloud. Once it's in the cloud, we can access that data, and there's different people who might want to do that. So, it might be the physician that prescribed the product might want to see some data from there. It might be the medical device manufacturer that may want to evaluate some of the data coming from the devices. It might be the healthcare system, payers, or it might even be the patient. So not only are we able to get data from the device to the cloud, we're also then able to access that data typically through web applications or dashboards. I threw a couple of other terms on here that either mean something similar or closely connected. So we're talking about connected medical devices, but another word or another term that you'll hear oftentimes is Internet of Medical Things. So it's a play on the idea of Internet of Things, but obviously incorporating the idea that medical devices as things can now also be connected to the internet. So that's another term you might hear. We hear about digital health. So digital health encompasses more than just cloud-connected medical devices. There are now medical devices that are actually just apps on your phone. So the FDA now has a mechanism for marketing software as a medical device. And so digital health incorporates both of those, so both devices and non-device-based digital therapeutics and diagnostics. And then the last terms here are telehealth and telemedicine. So those are terms that we're hearing a lot of right now, given the COVID pandemic. They're not new terms by any means. They've been around for decades, but it does feel like we're sort of in a important moment where there's just more incentive than ever to really push those forward. And while connected medical devices are not the same as telehealth and telemedicine, they're going to be a very important component of that because they're really enablers to take a lot of what's currently done in a clinical setting and take it to the home. All right, so now that we know what we're talking about when we say connected medical devices, why should I add connectivity to my medical device? Well, I think any medical device company worth their salt is always thinking about the patient, and there's a lot of benefits to the patients. So we just briefly touched on telemedicine, and we're seeing the critical value that telemedicine could bring. Today, COVID has made it all the more, front and center because, of course, for a lot of patients, there was a fear of going into a clinical setting. But I think, in that whole challenge that we've gone through as a society, one of the silver linings is that this idea of telemedicine, which has been around for decades, the technology's there now. What was sort of missing was the drive in terms of the payers reimbursing, physician involvement in telemedicine, and then really, in some ways, the culture in the healthcare system embracing this. So I really think this has been one of the silver linings of COVID has been the awakening to the power and the fact that telemedicine and telehealth are really here to stay. Connected medical devices are going to play a really key part there because there's only so much you can do as a physician if all you're able to do is talk to the patient. But if you're able to send them devices that can take their vital signals, that can perform therapeutics or therapy, that can measure what's going on with them, and those devices are easy to use and they're accurate and they're connected to the cloud, you're now just giving a lot more power to that conversation between a healthcare provider and a patient. So I would say one of the really significant benefits that we're seeing and we're going to see more of is telemedicine. A second major benefit is the ability to use connectivity to drive adherence, which ultimately drives efficacy. So when you're talking about therapeutics, one of the major barriers to getting high levels of efficacy is the level of adherence by the patient. And so if the patient is not adherent, no matter how good the drug is, it's not going to have the proper efficacy. Where connectivity comes into play is that you now have a means of communicating with the patient and in many ways determining if they're being adherent to the therapy. And so what I'm showing here is a couple of screenshots from an app that we've developed for one of our clients, where if you see on the top, I'll kind of show you, hover over it, we provide for them a scorecard of how they're doing in terms of their adherence. So this device, this is a pelvic floor exercise device. So it's for women with female urinary incontinence. And it guides patients through a series of exercises that helps them strengthen their pelvic floor muscles, which then helps them improve their symptoms for urinary incontinence. And so with this simple screen that we're showing here is the patient's supposed to do it twice a day, every day. On Monday, they did it once, so they can see that. On Tuesday and Wednesday, they did it both times, so they get some of that visual positive reinforcement. They also see their progress over time. They get some tips and some encouraging messages. They're able to track some of their other symptoms and see how those are improving over time. So you're getting that means of communicating with the patient to help them both track adherence and to provide you a means of encouraging adherence, which ultimately results in more efficacy. So this is another major benefit of cloud connectivity in medical devices. A third one, which we think is really dramatic, is the ability to have the device in your hand, but the algorithms in the cloud. So what I mean here is that, you know, some medical devices, particularly on the diagnostic side, require substantial computing power. And if you're sending a small device to a patient, you know, that's sufficiently low cost and easy to operate, you may not have the ability to put in the computing power to get really accurate algorithms. But if you can take the data, transfer it to the cloud, and then have the algorithms implemented in the cloud, you've got, you know, practically infinite computing power there. And then the results can then be sent back. So you can take a small amount of data, send it to the cloud, have the cloud, you know, implement whatever algorithms, and they might be, you know, artificial intelligence-based algorithms, machine learning, or other types of algorithms, do all of that crunching and send it back to the device. And this just enables a new type of separation of the overall system that allows us to bring devices to the home, which maybe in the past couldn't be done. And then finally, you know, the idea of over-the-air firmware updates or over-the-air software updates. So, you know, we're talking about medical devices. I've got a picture of a Tesla on the screen, and the reason is that, you know, one of the really cool things for people who either own or are familiar with Tesla, one of the things they innovated on is the idea that you could wake up on Tuesday, get into your car, and get a message saying that your car has had a software update, and it's now safer, it's now faster, it's now more, its GPS is more accurate. It has additional or improved features that didn't exist the night before. And the reason is that you're able to now send from the cloud to the device, in this case being a car, but it can be any medical device, new software that improves the functionality of the product. Let me pause there. Any questions so far?
Yes, actually, I'm just having Rick join us as a panelist, so he can tell you himself.
Excellent.
John Richard, you there? There we go.
So far so good. Oh yeah, yeah.
Ooh.
No, I can't tell you a ton about the project right now, but I was working on a project where assuring patient compliance was a key part of it. We actually had the possibility of the therapy coming out of contact with the part of the body that was the object of the therapy, but we also have a situation where some more or less chronic injuries also came coupled with patients who found that they could stay on leave longer if their injury did not heal. And so they would simply turn off the device for periods of time. And I know that seems incomprehensible, but it actually was a large part of the business. And they were able to monitor and assure patient compliance and also monitor the effectiveness. If a lead became disconnected, we could know immediately and we could send something out to their iPhone.
I know that Brent has the same idea for his CarePath device, where if the patient is supposed to be monitoring their urine output over a course of 10 days, and we haven't got a recording for the last, 24 hours, surely they just aren't using it, and maybe this is a time to just send them a note or a text or something like that. You taught me something new this morning, which is not surprising, but this concept of algorithms in the cloud, I think about this very linearly, like here I am on Earth, and here's the cloud, and I'm doing stuff here and sending it there. But you're saying that I can be doing stuff here and sending it down and then sending it back. I don't typically think of it as a continuum. I think of it as just unidirectional. I send up and then the reports come down.
Mhm. Yeah, and that can happen in real time, right? I mean, it's just like how today, if you're going on Netflix, your laptop or your phone is the device, but the computing is really happening in the cloud, and what you're getting is data being transferred to your phone to show you the visualization. But a lot of the computing is happening in the cloud, and the examples are ubiquitous, right? When you go on Google, you search something on your computer, but all of the crunching and the algorithms to find the thing that you're searching for are happening in a much larger cloud computer, and then you're getting all of these results on your web screen or on your web application. And so it's not a new concept at all. It's been happening for a long time in other areas, but now that we're taking medical devices and putting them in the hands of the patients with that cloud connectivity, we're able to now leverage that power, in the medical device world.
Thank you. Please continue.
Excellent. All right. So what about the manufacturer benefits? One of the really interesting benefits that comes out of the ability to update the product after launch is that you can really get the product to market faster without the fear of leaving some features on the table, if you will. So what I mean is that as a product manager or somebody who's really thinking of what that next generation product will be, you might have 50 features that you think would be really, really valuable to the patient, but there's 10 of them that are really critical. They might be your minimum viable product, as they say in the lean startup world, which is just that core set of features that the patient will benefit from tremendously. But you've got another 40 that will be helpful as well. You just, and you can, one option, of course, is to wait and to build out the full 50 before launching. But with cloud connectivity, one of the things you can do is launch the product with those 10 features and then improve the product over time through over-the-air firmware updates for the device, and then app updates on the application if there's a mobile app, for example, or a web app. So this it's a little bit of a more flexible model where you don't have to wait until the product is perfect, and you don't also have to wait until you launch a full new product. You can launch a product that meets the user needs and then improve it over time with software updates. And you can think of creative ways of monetizing this. You might have multiple versions of the device, that are really physically the same, but they just have different features enabled. So we see this a lot in the non-medical world. Now what we're seeing is the ability to enable this in the medical space. So there's a really big benefit to manufacturers. The other one, of course, is data analytics. So, it used to be that if you launch a device and send it out to the field, you may not know things like how often is it being used? Are people running into issues? What features are users, really using often versus features that they never even touch? They might not even know about them. What are their frustration points? So all those sorts of things, now you've got the visibility on the back end. So as a product developer or manufacturer, you're now able to really improve your product based on data from the field without necessarily having to conduct expensive studies or analyses like that. You can really look at your cloud and incorporate some phenomenal analytics. There's really cool tools now that, like Mixpanel is one example. It's a tool we commonly use where you can literally see how many times has a patient hit a certain button on an app or performed a certain function on their device. You can slice and dice it by demographics, by indications, whatever it is that you want to evaluate it as. You can analyze the data. There's another tool that we use, which is called SmartLook, which actually allows us to see the screen as the patient is seeing it, so that we can evaluate if there's areas in the workflow where they're getting stuck, for example. And another area that's really fascinating, it's not just the manufacturer benefit, it's really the whole healthcare system benefiting from this, and society as a whole, is that you're now able to get data on thousands or even millions of patients in a very capital efficient way. So of course, you have to have the proper controls. Certain things may require IRB, but you've got a platform now, if it's connected to the cloud, where you can send devices to many more patients, gather data, and then be able to really understand diseases better by having a lot more data in a much more cost-effective way. So it's another one of those benefits, that's not just to the manufacturer, it's to society at large, but to the manufacturer as well. They can understand a mechanism of action in one of the diseases they're targeting better, and then use that to develop more effective therapies, for example.
Jose, let me ask, I have a hard time conceptualizing what % of medical devices that are legacy, if you will, could be adapted with reason to have cloud connectivity. How expensive is it? I mean, is it just like basically you're starting from scratch? Because I know you're going to have to go through regulatory and all of that all over again. And should a manufacturer think, this is like a Nick Anderson question, I guess. How do you begin to quantify the economics of this is going to materially make us more profitable if we add this connectivity? How, if at all, does your organization help a prospect measure that to determine whether they should go or not go?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex question, right? Because it depends on the.
Do I get Mohammed on the line?
No, I can do that.
No, you can handle it. All right.
I can handle this one. It's going to depend on the specifics, right? But I think almost all products can really benefit from cloud connectivity. I mean, I say almost all because, of course, you can think of edge cases where maybe it's not so powerful. It's kind of like in the non-medical world, when you think about connecting your toaster to the cloud, okay, maybe we're getting to the point where that doesn't add so much value. But in the medical device world, I mean, even some simple instrumentation where being able to understand, how many times has a product been used, there's simplified versions of cloud connectivity that, that are not very expensive to implement and can add, significant value on the other side. The device manufacturer, the company that owns and commercializes the technology ultimately has to do that business analysis. And, where we help companies is once we understand the scope and we can get to that pretty quickly, we can put together, a budget and a timeline and help walk them through the effort that's required to get the product to the market with that cloud connectivity. So then they'll understand what is the cost and the benefit. That analysis usually falls on them to see, is it going to help me gain market share? Is it going to help me sell more products? Is it going to help me understand the market better so that we can develop better products and, put a value to that? They're usually in the best position to do that.
I would think somebody who's a startup looking to get bought out might say, look, here's connected proof of the utility of this device and how many times it's used. Or, I mean, there are other ways that data, of course, you could go look and see claims data and how often that procedure is performed, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you much greater granularity, and you get to answer questions not just like how many times has a patient used it, but are patients who are between the ages of 50 and 65 using it more than patients who are between the ages of 40 and 50? You're able to slice and dice that data in a much more granular way because you just have a lot more of it.
Mark Fine, I've given you webcam access. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, so for medical devices, one of the things that everybody worries about is HIPAA and data security and how you build that in, and how difficult that is. Clearly it's necessary, but also in your experience, how difficult is it to add those features?
Yeah, we'll speak to that a little bit later in the presentation.
Yeah, I thought you would, yeah.
Yeah, at a high level here, I mean, it's a process, right? So as with almost everything else in product development, in cybersecurity, FDA has provided some good guidance, but of course, there's good precedent in other industries as well. And it all starts with, just analyzing the product and seeing what are going to be the attack vectors, right? What are the risk factors? Is it things like people hacking in and actually affecting the device and making it work differently than it's intended? Or is it them just listening in and being able to capture data that's being transferred either wirelessly or through the internet to the cloud server? Are there risks of a man-in-the-middle attack where somebody's able to capture the data on one side, change it, and then send it to the other side, causing errors in the information? Or, you mentioned HIPAA. Are you transmitting protected information that can then de-identified or that can identify who the patient is and their conditions? So you've got to look at all those risk factors and attack them one by one, essentially. And so it's much like anything else in medical devices. It's understanding the risks, understanding the potential harm to the patient associated with those risks. What are your controls going to be? So things like encryption, things like authentication, and just putting in the proper controls to bring those risks to a sufficiently low level where they're outweighed by the benefits.
As the call host, this would be a good time for me to note that we also accept questions from people who are not white men. So if you're not a white man and you have a question, you can get on screen. Go ahead, Jose.
All right, great. All right, the last one that I've got here is just the idea of creative monetization models. In the, again, non-medical world, this idea of devices as a service has been around for a little while. And in the medical world, one of the business or monetization models that's existed for a long time is, device and disposables, right? So the disposables creating an annuity. But I think with cloud connectivity, we get other means of annuities, meaning things like charging for a device, not just for the capital equipment, but on a per use basis. So, now that you're able to get that information to the cloud, how many times has a device been used? You can look at things like, maybe not just making your business based on the sale of the capital equipment, but on the benefit that's afforded to the user, whether it's a patient or doctor or the healthcare system, and monetizing through other means. So again, that visibility and the control that can come from having central connectivity through the cloud just allows and enables other models as well. All right, and then last in terms of the benefits is to the healthcare system itself. So we talked about telemedicine. It certainly has benefits to the patient, but I think it also has significant benefits to the healthcare system, particularly in terms of efficiency, where you can have the same doctor see more patients, carry out therapy more effectively, and maybe even discharge patients earlier. So if you've got patients who are being paid for a procedure and it's capitated, and you've got the means of now sending them home earlier, but still keeping tabs on them to make sure that complications don't arise, that can be very powerful for the healthcare system as a whole. Another major benefit is that you're able to now see trends and not just snapshots. So this is kind of just one example showing glucose, where if a patient is just checking their blood sugar level periodically, they might miss some of those spikes. Well, some of what connected devices allow us to do is track things more continuously. And this is, just one example. And any other kind of example, if you think about going to the doctor and them performing a test, they're really taking a snapshot in time, and it may not be representative of the worst case things that happen throughout the day, or the best case, or the average, or how things correlate with certain activities or foods. So being able to record data continuously and send it to the cloud allows clinicians to look at really the trends, not just a snapshot in time, so that they're properly sampling data and better able to manage disease or provide a diagnosis or a therapy as well. And then the last one, I kind of alluded to it, but the idea of home monitoring, allowing healthcare systems to release patients earlier, but still keep tabs on them so that you don't get the high cost of readmission, or at least you reduce the frequency of those readmissions. There are other benefits. I mentioned earlier the idea of being able to carry out more effective clinical trials and clinical research, where you may be able to use a lot fewer clinical sites and yet get more patients, because you're able to more effectively and efficiently issue the therapy or issue diagnostics and evaluate the data. All right, so now that we have some of the benefits in mind, Then the next question would be, how do I do it? And I think that's already come up a couple of times. It's obviously, once you're sold on the idea, it's the next most important thing. And, going back to this image that we saw earlier, one of the challenges with developing connected devices is that it is a more complex type of system. So the architecture, now you're talking about, industrial design and mechanical engineering for your mechanical housings. You're talking about electronics, you're talking about firmware, but now not just, so firmware being the embedded software that's in the device itself, in the microcontroller, but now not just doing the things that the device would normally do to measure or affect a therapy, now also incorporating the connectivity piece of it, so the wireless communications portion of it, and the cybersecurity portion of it. So there is more complexity on the firmware side. And then of course now, let's say that you're using a mobile device as a gateway, you typically have to design at least one app, usually two, right? You'll usually want to do iOS and Android, and that has to have its cybersecurity implications in place and also usability. You got to think about the code that you're putting in the cloud. And then more than likely, to extract most of the value, you'll want to have some sort of web dashboard or portal and the analytics around that. So connected medical devices, to your earlier comment, Joe, they are more complex, they are more expensive to develop, and ultimately the device manufacturer has to do their own analysis of the cost and benefit. But I think for most medical devices, the benefits do substantially outweigh the costs because they perpetuate over many devices. So getting a little bit more granular, if we look at what are our options to wirelessly connect to the cloud, and then what are the different gateways associated with that. So we touched on this earlier, but just to go into more details, there's three main ways. One of them is to connect to a phone or mobile app on a phone, and then the phone can connect to the cloud. That connection between the gateway and the cloud, you typically don't have to worry about too much because it's well established. That's effectively the internet. But connecting to the gateway and then doing whatever processing you need to do there, that's the part that you have to think through. So if you're connecting to an iOS or Android device, the two most common tools that are used for that are Bluetooth and BLE. BLE is Bluetooth Low Energy, so it's the same radio, it's the same hardware, but it incorporates different protocols that allow you to consume a lot less battery. So you can take a device, the device that I mentioned earlier, it's got about 4 to 6 months of battery life on a coin cell, and that's because the wireless connectivity is done in a way that's very energy efficient. And the way that Bluetooth Low Energy works is whenever the device isn't communicating to the phone, it goes into a very, very low energy mode. And then when the phone wakes up the device to get its information or to send information to it, then it's going to consume more energy, but it's still more energy efficient than something like Bluetooth. So that's one of the means of sending that data to the cloud and receiving it. The second is Wi-Fi. It's less common, I'd say, in most medical devices that we've seen, because it is fairly power hungry, but it's not out of the question. There's certain use models where it makes sense. And, the benefit there is that you don't necessarily need an app. You can go directly to the cloud through Wi-Fi. And then the third one, which has really, it's a lot newer, it's only been out for a few years now, is using low power cellular. So, what's happened is that, as you know, with your phone, when you're at home, you might connect to the internet using Wi-Fi, but when you leave and you're away from your Wi-Fi router, it would use cellular. So it connects directly to a cell tower. So what the industry did was take that same hardware, those same radios, and just like how Bluetooth, they created a Bluetooth Low Energy protocol, in cellular, they created some low energy protocols that, you're not going to be able to stream Netflix through this, but that's not the type of data that you're usually trying to send with a medical device. So you give up bandwidth, you give up the amount of data you can send and receive in exchange for being able to be much lower power and also less costly. So LTM is one example, another one's NB-IoT, and these are wireless technologies that now allow a medical device to bypass, a phone application, a router, and just connect directly to the cloud. So a patient who's, having to move around with a device can still get connectivity wherever they are. One downside to using something like cellular is that there is a monthly cost. So, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi don't have that. But if you're using LTE-M, you can usually get, it's a SIM card, just like your cell phone. You can usually get service for about $1 a month. If you're trying to transmit and receive more data, it might be around $2 or $3 per month. But it enables a lot of really interesting uses. Let me pause there. Any questions so far?
Andre, you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a comment, Jose. Great presentation. And you touched on it slightly, but what we found is that it can actually help, the benefits of this can actually help with tech support and monitoring by incorporating certain types of physical sensors in the medical device, like temperature sensors, proximity sensors, and things like that. Instead of not knowing what the problem with the device is, you can monitor it remotely and possibly offer changes, so it reduces tech support calls and the possibility of having to return the device for modification. So that really helps the manufacturer in the tech support area.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. And it is, it's also one of those areas where even for non-home use, just for medical devices in the clinic, it can be really powerful in reducing some of those support costs. So great point there.
Rick, did you want to raise your point as well? I've opened your mic.
Yeah, some people have a little bit more of a concern on privacy and things, or the sense of intrusiveness. Maybe some of the older patients, and maybe some of the younger ones too. Setting aside the fact that you're already needing some kind of medical intervention, and there's going to be a certain amount of involvement of medical personnel. Has anyone toyed with ideas designed to make people feel better about this level of proximity? This level of proximity. For instance, like the only phrase that came to mind was, "Hey, we're just like having a virtual nurse walking around with you, making sure everything's going okay."
The answer is yes. And Corey spoke at our last 10X, and I'll share the video with you. But basically, he's created a smiling robot type of interaction where it's particularly of interest to a more senior generation. It's very intuitive to use, friendly, talkative. Did you take your pills today, Rick? Kind of thing.
Nice. That is nice. Now I knew nothing about it. That is cool.
If you attended, forget it.
You're going to get beat up by Joe.
Continue.
Hey, Joe, you still have my fee for when you do your next one.
I know, it's true.
I'm on deck.
True.
I can't wait for that.
2021, baby.
Yep, I hope so.
All right,
For the
excellent.
record, by the way, just a quick commercial. There will be no virtual 10X. There's no point. 10X is about hugging and ice cream. And
Amen.
You can't do that remotely. I mean, I can have ice cream, but you get the idea. Please continue.
Got it. All right, so the next piece of this, we talked about how do we get that data to the cloud, and then how do we host our server in the cloud? The cloud, at the end of the day, as we talked about earlier, is essentially a server, or it's a computer with a database and some API, some software on it that's connected through the internet. And you have a variety of options. Really, I'd say there's 4 main ones that we typically look at. AWS, IBM, and Microsoft Azure are 3 big ones for effectively using cloud as a service, if you will, right? So leaning on somebody like Amazon Web Services to host your server, and that has a lot of benefits. It's got benefits of getting things up and running more quickly. It's got the benefit of scalability more easily, and then all of these different services will provide you with different tools that you can use to get up and running faster and incorporate some functionality that you would otherwise have to develop yourself. Your other option, of course, is to do your own private cloud, and so incorporate your own server. The benefit of that is that it tends to be lower cost in the long run. So as you scale, these hosted servers are going to become more expensive. Whereas if you do your own private cloud, so there's kind of a break-even point where there's going to be more of an upfront cost to do your own private cloud, but as you scale, that cost is going to become lower, the recurring cost. Whereas if you're hosting it, it's going to be less expensive and easier upfront, but then it's going to become more expensive over the long term. And one of the things you want to be careful about is that, you know, those cool tools that they give you to make things easier, if you become very dependent on those, it then makes it that much harder to transfer to another cloud service or to a private cloud service in the future. So one of the things that we typically recommend and implement ourselves is we don't shy away from using, you know, an AWS or a Microsoft Azure, but we try to design things and architect them in such a way that we can then transfer over to a private cloud without a lot of pain. So you can do that as well. You don't have to take advantage of all of the tools that these cloud services provide for you, and design things in such a way that make it more portable, so you can then transfer to a private cloud, or you can start with private cloud from the beginning. There are benefits, you know, pros and cons to both of them, but we do try to shy away from becoming too dependent on one of these portals or platforms rather, because then it just becomes hard to move away from them. And then, you know, finally, the apps and portals, so the things that communicate to that cloud, you know, we think of these as two categories, one of them being the patient apps and the other one being the portals or, you know, web applications. So on the patient side, you know, the one main use of these apps is to interface with the device. You might use the app to change settings on the device. You might use the app to get information from the device, or in some cases, the app is effectively part of the device, right? So meaning that the function, the thing that the device is trying to do can't be done without the app. And I'll show you guys an example of that. Another major use of these apps is training and support. So as was mentioned earlier, you know, the app really gives you a means of reducing support costs by being able to provide a lot of that frontline support right there through the app. So you can really train the user on how to use the device, and then provide support for them when troubleshooting if they do run into issues or if they were confused about how to use the product. A third one we talked about already, but encouragement and adherence. A fourth one is logging events. So, you know, you can log events of the device itself, but you can also ask other information from the user that will be helpful for them and for yourself as a medical device manufacturer or as a caregiver to evaluate how different things are impacting the health of the patient. So just as an example, if you've got, you know, a continuous glucose monitor and it connects to an app, and on the app you also have features that allow the patient to log what they're eating and at what time, you can then look at correlations with how is their blood glucose changing in relationship with the things that they're eating, the amount that they're eating, the time that they're eating. So, you know, that's just one example. You know, we talked about the female urinary incontinence product before. You know, you can then correlate that with information like how many times is the patient going to the bathroom, you know, what are their symptoms looking like, how many pads are they having to wear. So, you know, those things, again, those correlations can be very helpful. And also you can track progress. So if you're, whether it's a therapeutic or kind of a diagnostic that measures things more longitudinally, you can track that progress of the patient and provide that feedback to the patient, which hopefully will encourage positive behaviors. And then as a last one, you know, you can also be creative with the app and add an element of community. Not all, you know, healthcare conditions lend themselves to adding a community aspect to it, but some do. Some conditions, you know, for example, there's devices and apps targeted towards new mothers. And you can imagine that there is value in a community there where new moms can either ask other new moms questions or get information from physicians or other experts. So it gives you a real opportunity to go beyond just the device and bring other elements like community. So that's on the patient app side. On the portal side, you know, there's value to physicians, to healthcare systems, to researchers, and then of course to the medical device manufacturers. So things like looking at patient progress, you know, physicians really appreciate that functionality. Being able to conduct research, as we discussed earlier, in a much more expanded way. Looking at trends, both of individual patients and of cohorts. Improving the product. So as we discussed earlier, being able to see what features are being used more often than not, which ones are more confusing, what are the things people are asking for. You have that means of observation and communication with the patient, which will allow you to build better products down the line. And then also manage devices. So you may decide that, we talked earlier about over-the-air software updates or firmware updates. And so that gives you a means of improving the product while it's in the field. But you may also decide that a device needs to be decommissioned for some reason, or that, different uses of the device get charged differently. Or you may be able to do failure analysis of devices on the field. So there's a lot of other benefits that you gain on the portal side from having that connectivity. All right, so getting close to the end here, but talking about the app's opportunities and challenges, right? There's no such thing as a free lunch. Everything has a cost. And if we look at the opportunities, again, this was mentioned earlier, the first two bullets here, reducing patient errors and frustrations. If you send a device out to a patient and you have no means of communicating with them or observing or providing information in a very digestible way, you're more likely to have patients who don't know how to use the product right or who experience frustrations. But if you've got that means of understanding what's going on and providing support, it's gonna result in a better patient experience, lower cost of customer support, which was mentioned earlier, and hopefully lower returns as well. So one way to think of the app is almost like a super IFU. Right? So if you're in the medical device world, that's your instructions for use. It's a very important part of your labeling and your overall product. And the app gives you a way, the downside of a typical IFU is that most people don't read it. They're like a user manual. You get something, you don't really want to sit there and read the manual. But if you design your app correctly, you can give information to the patient in bite sizes that make it, so that you're training them in a more natural way and in the appropriate time. So you're telling them how to do something in the moment where they're trying to do that thing. It's a much more effective way of really teaching patients how to use a product and gaining feedback from them. The last bullet here is just building a relationship and driving engagement and adherence. We've talked about the adherence piece of it, but there's also value for medical device manufacturers to build a relationship with the patient, right? So for the patient to understand the brand, and you may have multiple products that could be of benefit to a patient. Once you've got that communication means through an app, you're able to build that type of long-term relationship with the patient. So what are the challenges? Well, first, the app may be part of the medical device. In fact, it usually is. Not always, but there's a good likelihood. And that means it's going to be subject to regulations, whether it's, your IEC standards for software development or, risk management, design controls. Developing an app that's part of a medical device is very different from developing an app that's just being used for, non-medical applications. So that's going to be a major challenge. A second challenge is that you typically are going to want to develop two apps. Not always. Again, you may decide that you're sending the mobile phone with your product because you don't want to deal with this. But if you're designing it to send the device and have it be able to connect to the patient's phone, then you really have to consider that they may be iOS or Android, and that there could be dozens of models. So when you're doing your testing, you really have to account for all of the different models, all of the different settings in those phones, which may affect the functionality of the device. So it does, there's a high burden on the testing side of ensuring that when you release your product and when you release updates, it's not going to break for certain models of phones. And if you do have issues, that they're not going to impact patient safety in an unacceptable way. The next problem is that you get operating systems changing often. So we all know that, whether it's your iOS or Android device, you may get a new operating system and it can break things, right? So certain apps may stop working the way that they worked before because Apple or an Android manufacturer changed the OS. And so it's something that, once you launch the product, you still have to keep an eye on those updates and make sure that your app is still going to work. And as the last bullet point, I would say that user testing is really key. I think this is true with the device part of it as well, the physical device part of it. But on the app, it's that much more important. You want to start early, you want to do it often, and importantly, you want to do it with the actual device. So, oftentimes you're developing both the physical device and the app simultaneously. And so it creates a challenge because you may be ready to do some testing with the app and the device isn't ready. But there's creative ways to solve that. You may be able to, create simulators of the device, and that'll help, right? But at the end, you really have to get some user experience with the actual app and the actual device to make sure that you're not missing anything. So let me pause there again.
Yeah, there's a couple of white guys who have some comments.
Great.
Two of them have British accents.
Okay.
Yes, I think we're like the stereotypical white guys, really, with the origin of
very white.
So Jose, you may have answered this because I joined the call a bit late. I'm really sorry, but you talk about the cost. So obviously there's a significant engineering cost to this, unless you can buy obviously IP that you can plug in. But there's also documentation costs, right, for compliance. Is there such a thing as a kind of a package that you can bolt on, and you've got a VMV for data and for the device itself? How does that work?
Yeah, so it can work in a variety of ways. I can tell you that when we're developing a connected product, we'll usually go through the usual design controls process, right? So you understand the user needs. From that, you start drafting requirements for the overall system. And then at that point, we typically break it down. We'll do a set of requirements for the software itself, whether it's a mobile application or web application or whatever. We'll do a set of design inputs or requirements for the hardware portion of it, and we'll do a set of requirements for the embedded or firmware portion of it. And you can, and then you have to make sure that they all, trace to the proper user needs. So by creating some of that modularity, it's important. There's a number of reasons why you do it that way. And part of it is that the regulations around software development are different, than the types of things that you have to do for hardware. So you have to make sure that you're following, like IEC 62304, to make sure that you're compliant with the specific requirements around software. And then on the verification side, it is more complex as well. So, typically we'll do kind of hardware verification for the hardware itself, firmware verification, app verification, and then you want to do integration testing. So making sure that everything together is working well, and then, user testing to make sure that the overall system is usable and meets the desired functionality or the intended use.
Right. So I mean that's absolutely that's kind of bread and butter to me.
Sure.
But what you're saying now is I'm gonna bolt on this new piece of software. I'm a lot of the devices I work on have presentation. They've got screens, whatever. Now you're talking about an additional data port. So that now you've talked about two things. You say, okay, so now we've got more hardware, more connections, more software in the cloud, and you've also got that interaction between them. So that's that integration testing. So it doesn't scale linearly, right? So the benefit has to. I mean, I guess that's your job, right? Is really selling the benefits of this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and there are going to be some products where the benefits don't outweigh the cost, right? There is a cost for sure to both developing a connected device and really maintaining it too. Because, as we discussed here, whereas a physical device, you might design it and really not have to mess with it for a long time. When it's a connected device, you're always going to be looking out for, has a new update to iOS impacted the functionality of my product, right? So that's a portion of it. Another portion of it is that you're sending all this data to the cloud. You're probably going to want to do something with it, right? So there's some support costs to analyzing data and extracting value from it. But in most applications, I would say, or in many applications, the benefits largely outweigh those costs. Whether it's because you're able to get better economics around the product, you're able to get better market share, or you're able to develop a new technology that would not be possible without the cloud connectivity.
Yeah. So do you actually provide that that analysis of the return, or is that something you expect your customer to do?
Yeah, I mean, there's really good people out there who can do more the health economics portion of it. What we can provide is the cost piece of it, right? So we can help our clients understand what is the cost of adding this functionality to your product, and then what can you expect as an ongoing cost later to support it. The benefit portion of it, either they or another great consultant, which I'm sure Joe knows, many of them can help them figure out what the benefit piece of it is from a finance side.
Speaking, by the way, of great consultants that Joe knows, I want to remind everyone to check out the What Do You Need channel from time to time, because I needed someone this week and I posted it and Bill was like,
Hi, Leah.
I know a guy, and hold on, Elizabeth. And Bill was right there, and I think you won a new client out of it, yeah?
We didn't quite. We were very close, but they want it quick, and yeah.
And you
They
do
got-
it
they
a
got
slow
very
British way? I get
We're
it.
just we're too slow. No, we're quite a small team. They wanted to throw a big team at it.
Okay.
So that's life. They come and go.
Another thing, just administratively, as we hit the top of the hour, I finally got a Zoom to buy out my GoToMeeting contract, because I'm so tired of this recording not working properly. So you're all going to find out that you have been canceled from all subsequent meetings, and you will get an invitation to all subsequent meetings on a new platform. So good luck, and next week we'll talk on Zoom. David Hampton, you've got something to say.
Yeah, hi, and thank you very much, Joe, and good presentation, Jose. 2 comments, 1 question. 1 comment to the earlier person who asked about HIPAA. HHS has given a number of waivers, as has CMS, for HIPAA requirements to try to facilitate telemedicine during the COVID crisis. We've seen some similar things here in Europe. So whether it's temporary or permanent, we don't know, but they are relaxing some of the requirements for data sharing in telehealth environments. The other thing, Joe, your question about interaction between cloud and devices. One interesting one we've seen that Jose didn't mention is for scheduling and coordination. You have a telehealth session with a patient, and then they need to go to a testing facility, then they need to be seen by a specialist, then they need to go to a pharmacy. That all needs coordination, which actually goes very well through things like calendar apps and existing capabilities on the smartphone. So, and you can handle notifications and everything else. So that's an example where you have a lot of back and forth synchronization of services between the cloud and the patient and the providers. Jose, my question relates to that. I had a question from an investor who was saying, there's really nothing in a medical app that's not already in a smartphone except for the sensor and the back end data analytics. Somebody tells me they need to develop all this specialized stuff. They've already got a contact and a calendar and a locator and can do Bluetooth and everything else in their smartphone. What more do I need to consider if they say it's going to be a medical application?
I think it's indication specific, right? But I'll show you an example in a minute where the phone application is, the product wouldn't work without the phone application, essentially. So
is the phone application enough, or do you need something more besides privacy, for example, or encryption to make it medical?
That's a good question.
Well, it has to follow, to make it, when you say to make it medical, you mean to abide by the regulations or what exactly?
Or to make it work in a medical environment, yeah.
Yeah. There's a variety of things, right? So, we mentioned earlier 62304. So you have to make sure that you're following the proper guidelines for software development. You have to make sure that you're evaluating it in terms of usability. So the app is now part of the device. And so you have to make sure that you're meeting the usability requirements. Cybersecurity, we've touched on, and we can talk a little bit more about that. You have to make sure that you're properly doing that, and you have to follow design controls as with any other part of the medical device. But once you do those things and you secure part of your, if it's in the US, a 510K or PMA, it's now part of the medical device. And then depending on the setting, yes, maybe also HIPAA or whatever else. So it's very indication specific, but there's plenty of precedent and good guidelines from FDA on what needs to happen.
Peter Harris, do you want to share what you have? And just a quick announcement that Peter will be our guest speaker on August 7th, and he's going to teach us a little thing or two he knows about obesity surgery. A few patents under his belt and the like. Peter, what have you got for us today?
Yeah, I've got a question. Thanks, Joe. Jose, you touched on cybersecurity. I think that as a subject that's really global and endemic to cloud medical devices, I think it needs to be more than touched on by thought leaders like yourself and your teams and the people you associate with. In the States, unfortunately, I think we've got a track record of being in denial in areas of cyber intrusion by bad actors like China, Korea, and North Korea, and Iraq, and so on. And another category of bad actors here in the States that typically seem to be based in the States, and those are scam operators. And so I think that the cloud medical computing industry is going to be totally bogged down and handicapped unless you guys, in inverted commas, pay a lot more attention than just passing reference to cybersecurity. For example,
and would you like me to get Mohammed to join our little panel here?
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit, but he is the expert on our side. And if I just kind of skip ahead here a little bit, just to provide some of that. FDA does expect cybersecurity analysis. I would say it's usually, if you meet the FDA kind of requirements around this, that's just scratching the surface of it. They provide a good set of at least minimal things that you should be doing, but it's ultimately, it's a process of performing risk analysis, so identifying your vulnerabilities and then determining your controls. So looking at things like, denial of service, right? A hacker can hack a device or an overall system to make it so that a patient can't get the service they need. Probably the most extreme case you can imagine here would be like a pacemaker, right? So if they can hack into a pacemaker and turn it off, or have it do something that shouldn't be done, you can ultimately result in somebody's death. Things like malware, things like ransomware, things like man-in-the-middle attacks. You have to consider all of these, and you have to consider them across the entire system. And it will depend on the risk of the product, right? Because the level of controls that you can incorporate into a medical device will vary in complexity. I mean, down to, cybersecurity happens to be an area of expertise for us, even beyond medical devices. We work with one client who's not medical, but their devices are used for privacy guarding of high-level government agencies. And I mean, it's down to the point where even the manufacturing, even the way that the microprocessors get programmed has to be done in a safe, like a physical safe, to make it so that unauthorized people can't access that and embed malware or viruses or other means of attacking at the manufacturing place. So even down to the supply chain, right? So making sure that the chips that are being used in the system don't have incorporated into them, back doors for hackers to be able to get into it later. So now, do you need to do that if the device isn't life-sustaining, where it's not sending identified information, where, it's just really not sending data that's going to create significant harm? No, it's a risk-benefit, just like anything else in medical devices. But you have to start with a risk analysis. Like, if you have to consider all the cases, if a bad actor does this, what is that going to result in? And how big is that risk? And so then the controls you put in need to be commensurate with that. So that's part of the process. That's the process that FDA might ask you to do. But the quality of that process, your ability to really understand those different threats, will depend on the expertise of the team doing that analysis.
I hear what you're saying, Jose. But my point is, and maybe this is a legacy issue, but my point is that unfortunately we do have a history of denial and carelessness. For example, you guys have probably got the same notices that I've got about do not install the next Windows 10 update that you are offered by Microsoft, because the Microsoft Windows 10 updates are triggering some error in Chrome that exposes user data. And this has been going on for a couple of weeks now that I've got seen this back and forth. There was some denial between the two companies as to who was responsible. Well, apparently it's turned out that it's Windows 10 updates that are triggering this adverse reaction in Chrome. And then, I've got, as we speak, I've got a check on my desk here for some pennies from Primera for a class action settlement for personal data, patient data being exposed to scammers and hackers. So I guess the point that I'd like to leave us with, in my thought, is that tackling this on a piece-by-piece basis is simply not going to work. It has to be tackled on an industry-wide basis, and there has to be a driver in the industry that says that the entire industry is going to tackle this problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it is. It's certainly something that requires a lot more awareness and effort on the overall industry. It sounded like Phil wanted to say something too.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean,
Hold on just a sec. Administratively, we're seeing a black screen for you right now.
Me.
There we go. Thanks.
I see. Yeah, so I mean, you're aware of the
white light.
Thanks, Joe. You've seen, obviously aware of the Trek vulnerability that's coming out this week, and we're seeing some big players like Microsoft and HP are potentially at risk here, neither of whom have put forward a statement on this. I think that comes back to what you were saying, Peter, about there's going to be some there's going to be some finger pointing, and it seems that Trek IP block that's being used in a lot of IoT devices, from UPSs to enterprise control systems. We know it's in some medical devices. I think it's already been identified in an infusion system. Now, people buying in technology that tech is what, 10 years old, that IP core, 15 years? From a it's a different era. And if this turns out to be widespread, this could be major. This could be as bad as the PIP scandal for breast implant materials. So what's your take, Jose, on this? Obviously, we don't know how it's going to play out yet.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you my thoughts on it. If Mohammed's on the line, he can provide more. He's got a lot of expertise on this. But really, look, the risks are, and I mean, what you see in the news is the tip of the iceberg, right? There's been all sorts of, even at the silicon level, right? So microprocessors and processors that have backdoors into them, so that at any given point somebody can hack into them and extract information or change functionality. And these are things by this isn't by some small manufacturer. These are threats that have been embedded into things by companies like Intel and AMD. So there are a whole lot of threats out there, and part of what you have to do is figure out, it's challenging, right? You have to figure out, how do you design the system so that even if there's a breach there, it doesn't result in a patient harm, it doesn't result in information, and that can be done, right? So the way that you segregate information within a system, the way that you create authentications and other mechanisms can make it so that even if there's a breach, the harm is not substantial. And oftentimes that's the best you can do. And we're all right here on GoToMeeting, and we all use our computers and we all use our phones, and people can hack into your phone right now, listen into your conversation, see everything that's being reported through your video. Those are threats that exist. And yet we still do it. Why? Because the benefits outweigh the cost, right? If we just, we can all go, live in the mountains and be completely disconnected, but then we miss out on the benefits. So it's the same thing in medical devices. You're constantly having to go, okay, what is the risk of this product being breached? Does the benefit outweigh that? And what can we do realistically to just bring that risk level down so that if there is a breach, the impact of it is not so bad.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and it's all about the failure mode analysis at the end of the day. But I think that, there's people, I know engineers who would be complacent to think that, oh, well, that's deployed everywhere, so therefore it must be robust. That's not the right approach. Okay, cool.
That's correct. You always have to think that can be breached. If it does, how do we make it so that if it does, when it gets breached, it doesn't result in patient harm.
Elizabeth, if you're still there, I see you put yourself on pause and muted yourself. I've unmuted you, but are you still there?
Bless you.
Ms. Friedman? Okay, we'll return to her. Joanne, I know you don't have a webcam, but you had a comment? Ms. Evans?
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Unmuted. Oh, I was just curious about firewalls and security. And I mean, I worked at a company where we had 3 firewalls that were set up. If one got breached, we got notified. And we got another. Oopsie, I got somebody calling.
Hey, it's her phone ringing. We'll wait for that. You think this is an easy job? I just sit here and drink coffee all day? This is work.
Sorry, but I think your question was around firewalls in general.
Yeah, and she's still self-muted, so yeah, go ahead with that.
I think firewalls are one of many mechanisms that are used for for protecting data, right? But there are tons of different mechanisms that you have to incorporate, from encryption to authentication to like firewalls. And what you implement and how you implement it is going to depend on the risk level of the product, on the architecture of the software, on what kind of data is being transmitted and received. And I think at some point, if we unmute Mohammed, he can probably provide more intelligence information on that. That's his area of expertise.
Let me see. He was on twice, so let's see if I can bring this one on, and that'll do the trick. Mohammed, you can speak now?
Yep, hi.
Oh, yay, there we are.
So yeah, I think some interesting points have been raised, and Jose did mention something kind of unwind a little bit that's important, which is ultimately it's all about a cost-benefit analysis. I mean, there are risks in everything, and there's costs to addressing those risks. And that's really what it comes down to. And you have to treat cybersecurity just like anything else from a medical perspective with regards to patient harm. It's just another potential source of patient harm that needs to be addressed. So if you approach it that way and you approach it right from the beginning, just as you would with any other harm, again, I think some of the mistakes that have happened in the past are because cybersecurity was oftentimes an afterthought. So products had been created, and then somebody thought of, oh, well, what do I do about cybersecurity? And that never works out well. Trying to apply security after the fact is not a good way to do it. Just like, again, similarly, not considering harms correctly for any medical device, and then deciding at the end after you finish the product, oh, by the way, I just discovered a harm that I didn't think about. Again, same problem will occur. So to sort of be more succinct, ultimately, whether it's firewalls, VPNs, there's all kinds of levels of security you can add that all have consequential costs to them that you can do depending on what your projected harm is from access. If it's a device that's collecting data that, as Jose said, that really has no impact on a patient, you may not need that level of security. If it's something that can clearly lead to a patient's death or uncovering of critical information to the patient, then certainly you want to employ all sorts of cybersecurity capabilities. I think the other challenge, which Jose kind of has right at the last slide with cybersecurity, is a bit different, is that it's kind of a never-ending thing. We treat this as a continuum. So you do an analysis at the beginning of a project, and you come up with various controls based on the risks that you want to mitigate. But then periodically that has to be constantly refreshed, because attackers are varying their attacks, their technologies are changing rapidly. So it's a bit so that's another area that's a bit different and this is not just only in medical, it applies even beyond medical, is that, it's not enough to address cybersecurity by saying, oh, I did an analysis 2 years ago and it was fine, because the analysis you did 2 years ago is probably irrelevant today. And so it's a new beast that we have to tackle, which is this idea of constantly analyzing, constantly reacting to threats, and if you're really good at it, being able to predict what threats could come, and then put in preventative measures. I'll stop now.
I had Andres join the panelists here. I don't know if he's activated his PIN yet, but he's a handsome guy. I thought people should see him. And he's the third part of your triumvirate of founders for BoldType. So there he is, folks, but he cannot be heard because he did not follow the basic
Appreciate it, guys.
Oh, you can be heard.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Joe, you had me as Mohammed mistakenly, and I was like, I'm not Mohammed, so please don't.
Oh,
I was trying to get Mohammed labeled in. Yes, but yes, we got to figure it out. We're good. Thank you, Joe.
So tell us just a bit.
Nice to meet you all.
What part of the organization do you lead for BoldType, Andres?
Yeah, so technically I'm the VP of Product Development. I've been managing mostly the software operation efforts. So I've been managing the application development team, the cloud development teams, the web application development teams. So that's what I do for BoldType.
Thank you for introducing yourself. And God bless her, she's been sitting there very patiently. And she may or may not have a question about connected medical devices, but Elizabeth Friedman is my newest friend and our newest subscriber to MDG Premium. And as long-timers know, I'd love to at least give new folks a chance to introduce themselves. So Elizabeth, if you'd kindly let us know about you.
Well, I'm Elizabeth Friedman from San Antonio, Texas, and I am developing a product that has the potential for some potential interface with the connectivity. Right now, we're not planning to include that. It's a very simple concept in the medication safety arena. That's very vague, and I just have to leave it at vague right now. We are very much in the development stage, but this topic is absolutely critical to what we're thinking about doing in the future.
So I know a guy.
What?
I know a guy who knows a thing or two about it.
I know a guy who knows a guy, and I'm not another white guy on your screen.
For that reason alone, I had to get you on the screen. So just to clarify, and I won't spill any of her secrets, but yes, Elizabeth is embedded in the patient safety movement.
Yes.
And we want to make sure that patients are not fed the wrong things.
That's great.
Right,
yeah.
Correct. Yes, or anyone is fed the wrong thing. So your speaker, Peter Harris, Dr. Harris, talking about obesity surgery is something I'm interested in that's not related to my medical device product.
Right. And you look great. I don't think you need obesity surgery.
Oh.
Oh, you meant that, sorry.
Yeah, the topic. So yeah, so 40 years ago, I worked with a surgeon who did that surgery on 700-pound patients. It's very interesting.
Well, Peter's an impressive dude with patents that might have been the thing that your guy was working on.
Probably so.
But you'll have to tune in on August 7th. I can't.
Well, I'm very excited to be part of this group.
Like Who Shot JR?
All the way down in Texas, Who Shot JR, yeah. So I'm excited to join your group, Joe. This is fabulous.
Thank you. We love having you.
Thank you.
Jose, in 9 minutes, you will tie the record for the longest presentation ever. So do something.
All right, that sounds scary. So look, we talked about cybersecurity. It is a topic that could easily take up, I think a lot of these topics could easily take up a full hour. We wanted to give you just a little bit of a taster of some of those things. And tell you a little bit about our team, I guess.
You've seen 3/4 of them.
Seen 3 of them. My name is Jose. I'm the president, chief system architect. Got a PhD in electrical engineering from MIT. I've spent most of my career in wireless and connected devices, and a good portion of it in medical. Mohammed, who you guys saw, is our chief software architect. He's an alumnus of Imperial College. He was the former chief software architect at Motorola for their two-way radio division. So he gained a ton of cybersecurity expertise there, because as you can imagine, those two-way radios go into the hands of government agencies where cybersecurity is a big threat. And Andres, who you guys also saw as well.
I love you too.
All right.
Mhm.
He's an engineer by training. He's got an MBA from Harvard. Has focused the last part of his career in software development, so leading software development teams. And then we do have a full-time quality assurance and regulatory affairs director. He's taken over 20 products through the 510K process, as well as some of the international processes. Overall, our organization's about 30 people, so we can do sort of soup to nuts product development, but we do specialize and focus on connected wireless medical devices. So that's the area of expertise that we've chosen to focus on, and we've got a team that's.
Mark Pine wants to know where you're located. I'll tell him you are in Florida. Rick Stockton had asked about humanizing medical healthcare delivery to seniors. I shared a link for everybody. And Rob Stuppelbein has not yet joined MDG Premium. I'm not going to let his pretty face show up on the screen. I'm just going to have to read it the old-fashioned way. This is for Rob. Rob asks, what are your thoughts about taking scan data or measurements and then pushing that to the cloud to then design and ship a physical customized device, for example, Invisalign?
So can you say the first part of that? What are your thoughts of taking what?
Scan data,
scan data,
or measurements data, and pushing that to the cloud for design and shipment of a physical device. So basically, can I take a mold of your teeth, send that to the cloud, have it designed, and have it, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's touching on another one of those really fascinating trends in the medical device world of really personalized products, right? Where, you know, prosthetics, for example, can now be 3D printed or built to match the precise junction point with the patient, or, you know, with Invisalign's one example, but, you know, other in the dental space, I think there's other applications where connecting the data to the cloud and on the back end being able to, you know, to build personalized products and send them to the patients. It's just another one of those applications. And even test data, right? I mean, we're looking right now with COVID at different diagnostics and tests where if the equipment is connected to the cloud, and not all of them are, you're then able to get that information out to the overall community much faster. So those are all other great examples.
I have to say, poor Rob. He wrote, I even put on a presentable shirt and erased my whiteboard. But it's all irrelevant. If you can't pay me $39 a month, how am I supposed to keep this operation going? Now, here's some good news. Andre Domino writes, I would like to speak to Jose on a potential project. And here he is now.
Andre.
Well, Jose, you know, we design and manufacture medical devices, and we get projects thrown at us all the time. And we're certainly fine on the hardware side, the embedded side, and so forth. But what we try to do is we do sometimes get requests for the incorporation of the remote control with apps, as I was speaking before about the tech support and so forth. So just wondering how you would approach a project and you know, working in essence as part of a team that's working on a project like that.
Yeah, no, we do that all the time. I think it's one of the things I love about this community is that, you know, like I said earlier, we don't do every type of medical device. And there are projects that come to us that we go, well, this happened 2 weeks ago. Project came to us. I'm probably going to anger some people because I didn't send it to anybody on here, but it was on microfluidics, and microfluidics is not an area that we do a lot of work on. I know there are people on this group that do. And we knew another company that was great at it, so we sent it over to them. And we have other projects where we just work together with another group because they've got expertise in one area, we have it in another. We try to focus on connected medical devices. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, the way I look at it is we should always be looking for the well-being of the client, you know, is trying to get technology to the market that's going to help people out. And, you know, collaborating with other development groups is a very common part of our practice. So would love to talk to you about any way that we can collaborate.
Mohammed, if you want to bring yourself back on, you had a comment for the group. Andre, when are you speaking? We need to have a formal Friday presentation. We're all, I've got down to short sleeves now. We need ties and dresses and other regalia.
Yep.
Mohammed, you had something to share with the group? Maybe I didn't click this one, or I clicked it too many times. Attendee is self-muted. I can't help you.
Hey, Joe, while we're waiting for that,
You're saying?
Yeah, Andre?
no, I was saying while we're waiting for Mohammed, that's the beauty of this, MDG Premium, is that it really allows us to connect with these. I mean, I didn't know Jose before, and here's an opportunity where we can add value to our client projects. So thanks to you, Joe.
Tells me muted by organizer. Come on, man. This is what I do for a living.
There you go. Now, got it now.
All right.
No, I
Go
was
ahead,
just
you had a
actually, Rick had a question about using, potentially avoiding the need to have two apps, as Jose described, one on iOS, one on Android, potentially even a third one on Microsoft's platform, by using what technically is probably called hybrid apps, basically web-based apps that run on phones. And my comment, Rick, to you is that, yes, we've definitely looked at that, and we continue to look at it. It's a continually evolving technology. The biggest challenge so far that we found with them is that connectivity to the devices. So having the phone connected to the device is generally one of the most problematic areas, only from the sense of making it be seamless to the customer. Again, one of the goals here is to make the phone and the device work together really well and not cause friction for the actual user, the actual patient. So yes, it's definitely an option. We continue to look at it, and I do expect that at some point that will become a viable solution. It just, up until now, with the projects we've looked at, it just hasn't reached the point of viability. Does that help, Rick?
Thank you very much for that. And we will end where we began, with just the two boys and Jose bringing it on home with a minute to spare. If you've learned nothing else from today's presentation, remember this.
Remember that there is a lot of value in connecting your medical devices to the cloud, both to the patients and to you as the medical device manufacturer, and really to the overall community. It is challenging, but if you build the right team or if you work with the right partner, it can be done. And I think in the majority of cases, the benefits do outweigh the costs. That's it. And thank you for having me. Cute dog.
Come on, man. You're embarrassing me.
So cute.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
See you
you.
next week on Zoom, I hope.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.